If I were God, I would not enter the world as a baby. I would have come like at least already showing the marks of wisdom, like gray hair, penetrating eyes, chiseled, weathered, wise looking. Like I would definitely not have come like wet and bloody and tiny. And I would have made my entrance like from the sky, and it would have been on like streamed everywhere and picked up by all the major news channels in the evening. And I would have like had words in the sky like Biden had after his the night that he got announced he won or whatever, right? You know, it said compassion in the sky and like fireworks and stuff. Like, I mean, like realistically, the God that I think of actually would be more of like a natural thing, probably not so much like fireworks and written words, but maybe at least like just some stunning like sunset, like colors you've never seen, and like just coming in with aurora borealis going off and a solar eclipse at the same time. um you could have, there's options, there's a lot of options here, there's a lot of doors that God could have chosen to enter the world through, right? He could have come with woodland creatures riding on comets, playing just like crazy instruments you've never heard, the most intense intricate music you've ever heard in your life. He could come like out of the earth from an earthquake or riding on a tsunami. Or another good one I thought of is like he could have come, at the Sistine Chapel where the fingers like almost touching. He could have broke through the roof with his arm, and just been like, like there were so many options. And if I were God, I definitely would not have chosen to waste 3 months unable to even hold up my head, um, doing nothing but sucking on a boob and creating yellowish, watery poop. Like, I wouldn't have wasted 18 months totally immobile. I wouldn't have wasted 4 years unable to express my thoughts with words. And then another 14 years with an immature body. And then another 12 years as a mature adult, not even saying anything about what I was there for, right? The way that Oscar Maru, who's a pastor from Nairobi, the way he puts it is that's poor product placement. Not healing anyone, not telling anyone what you're up to for 30 years. I would have been in more of a hurry to save humanity. And so I would have come like ready to get to work, right? The way that God did it was too slow. It was too low tech. It was too underwhelming. It was too vulnerable. Waiting all that time with talent like that, it shows lack of commitment and lack of realism, right? Sending him into a poor family when we know that the answer to reaching the world is more money and more power, that the answer is a better distribution system, that the answer is more innovation. It's a sign that God doesn't understand how the world works. Um, I would have bought so many Instagram ads to get my message out that you wouldn't have been able to swipe twice without seeing my chiseled gray haired Jesus with woodland creatures on a tsunami. And salvation would have come fast. There wouldn't have been all that waiting. Again, the way that Oscar Maru puts it is I probably wouldn't have even needed a cross. But God's way was quiet and subtle and subversive, and therefore God's way won. God's way changed everything. God's way changed humanity because God's way was the way of incarnation. And when God chose the incarnation, he chose to make these four trades. And both Kane and Brittany already hit these. He chose to trade glory for humility, to trade power to get vulnerability. He chose to trade a good neighborhood for a bad one. And he chose to trade places with us. And if you really want to follow Jesus, you've got to be willing to make those kinds of trades. You've got to be willing to live an incarnational life. If you want to become more like Jesus, like that's the way. Um, so the first trade that I'll talk about really quick is glory for humility. If we want to become more like Jesus, to be more incarnational, like Jesus was silent for 30 years before he taught. He belonged before he led. Jesus, he puts himself in a position of reliance on other people. And we like to be the ones who have all the answers and who never needs anything, who's always there to help other people, but none of us want to be the one who has the needs, right? But God modeled this different way because there's a deeper connection that you can have with another person when you're willing to be vulnerable instead of just powerful, right? Um, so I was trying to think of when are times in my life that I've actually chosen to be like incarnational, and one of the choices in my life that I think I'm most proud of is right when I was coming out of college. I was like trying to decide what I was going to do with my first year after college, and I was so full of myself. I thought I could do literally like anything. I was like, either I'm gonna should I be a mega church pastor? Actually, that one wasn't really on my radar at that point. It was more like, should I be like an professor at an Ivy League school, or should I go start an amazing NGO, right? Like, I really believed in myself in a way that was probably not going to last very long in the real world, and did not last very long in the real world. But that year I had it. And as I was looking at all the options, talking to all these possible places that I could go intern at, I had this conversation with the guy who's still my mentor today. His name's Steve Luton, and I was talking with him about this program that he was involved with called Mending Wings, which was a Native American youth outreach on the Yakima Reservation on the east side in Washington. And the point where I was like, I know for a fact that this is what I'm going to do, was when he said this. He said, you should come to the reservation because all the stuff you're good at isn't going to be worth anything out here. And all these kids are going to care about is whether you love them. And when I heard that, I was like, that I know that that's the incarnational Jesus step that like I've been looking for. And I was like, I know that that's the freedom of a life that's past the performance issues that have been driving me so far. And it was really healing for me to be there that year and to live out past the need to perform, and to live with a bunch of kids who didn't really care about how smart I was. All they cared about was that I was someone older who was willing to hang out with them. And yeah, it was good to be with people who didn't care that I was really good at reading philosophy books or whatever else, but who were really into just like Mountain Dew and Insane Clown Posse and community. And yeah, I'm really glad that I made that choice. And I think that everything in our culture is telling us to lean more and more into the strengths and into the skills that we have. That I just saw it like last week, where Clementine does school at home. And so her teacher was at one point, usually her teacher is like absolutely fantastic. I'm so happy with her teacher. But this day she was like, she was talking about how everybody is special. And she was like, everybody is special because everyone has their own thing that they're good at. Like, for example, maybe you're really good at football. And so you end up on the Seahawks. And like when she said it, she said it with a little bit of hesitation, where like that I think was maybe her realizing she'd set the bar pretty high for the special thing that everyone has. I don't know exactly. And but when I heard her say that, I got really angry because I was just like, this is the garbage that's making everyone in my life dysfunctional. Like, this is the garbage that they've been feeding me since the beginning, and it's such a letdown. So I went over to Clementine and I was like, Clementine, you do not need to be special. You don't have to be good at something to choose to do it. And I was good at a lot of other things, but I decided to be a pastor. And I don't know if I'm that good at it, but I'm doing it because I love it. And our skills aren't what make us special. Like, God's love is what makes us special. In in the safety of God's love, you don't have to be strong. You don't have to be doing what you're good at. There's more freedom living in the out of control space of vulnerability, and that's the space that God leads us into. And so, and then the second trade, yeah, is power for vulnerability, because nothing could have caught our attention more than for God to enter humanity through the door of a baby. Like, nothing else would have caught our attention or thrown us as off guard, right? Uh, totally vulnerable to the care. I think it was Lisette that was saying that. he chose the door of an immigrant. He chose the door of a subjugated people group. He chose the door of a poor family, of a rural family. And um, so here's an interesting detail, which is that this prophecy, yeah, like we were talking about, Isaiah, he said it to King Ahaz. So that's the immediate context. And so context. So Ahaz was the king of Israel, and he was caught between a couple of hostile powers that were making power grabs and starting to get hostile with Israel. And so parts of Israel were siding with different powers. He had the Edomites and the Philistines who had plans to take them over. And then on the other end, the Assyrians were gathering a lot of power too. And so he's in this deliberation process, like, who should I cut a deal with to keep from being just totally blown away? He's got these menacing powers like encroaching on him, and he's probably worried sick. He's thinking about it all the time. And he's leaning towards making a deal with the Assyrians, but he knows that that's going to come with a price, and the price ends up being a lot bigger than he expects. So in the middle of this, Isaiah is coming to him and he's saying, don't lose faith in God. Like, don't trust in human power, because God will keep you safe. Like, the way he puts it is better. If you don't stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. If you don't stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Ahaz does not take his advice at all. He decides that he doesn't want to take his fears and talk about his fears with God. He wants to handle things himself. And he tries to dress it up in like religious language. He says, oh, I don't want to test God. But really, like, Isaiah is there with words from God that he doesn't want to address. He doesn't want to handle it with God. He wants to handle it the logical way. And so he surrenders Israel to the Assyrians because he knows what we all do, that money and power and militaries are what decides who calls the shots, right? And in this process, he doesn't just surrender his people. You can tell that he starts to like surrender his identity. He starts to kind of like idolize the Assyrians, the sophisticated Assyrians. He starts bringing some of their gods and refurbishing the temple, putting them in the temple. You can tell that he's like trying to keep up with the sophisticated, the fashionable, like the forward-looking gods. And things go super badly. Like the Israelites get subjugated really horribly, and they go super bad for Ahaz, where he goes off the rails and he sacrifices his children to some of these foreign gods in the Valley of Hinnom, which, if you're familiar with it, the Valley of Hinnom is what later gets called Gehenna, which is the word for hell. So it got its name and it got its bad vibe because he was sacrificing his children there. Later, it became the town dump because no one wanted to go there because everybody was scared of it, because it was the place that King Ahaz was killing his kids to foreign gods. And then later, that's the word that Jesus used, that trash heap outside of Israel. That's the word that he uses that we now translate to hell. So let's just say things don't go super well for Ahaz, right? So yeah, what I'm getting at here is Isaiah's prophecy has a context. He's telling Ahaz, don't trust in human power. He's saying true security doesn't come from the powers that be in the world, but from faith in the promises of God. And he gives him this promise to hold onto, which is the same thing that we're supposed to hold on to, which is that God with us, Emmanuel, the God with us, is coming as a baby, and that true power comes from embracing vulnerability, that God's way won because vulnerability drains fear of its sway over us, right? And 2020 has been a year of exposed vulnerabilities, right? Health wise, economy wise, emotional stability wise. And that warning that Isaiah gave Ahaz, it's for us too. If you don't stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. So let's anchor our hope in that phrase that people have been anchoring their hope in for 3,000 years, that the virgin will give birth and his name will be God with us. And let's embrace our exposed vulnerabilities, because when When you trust God, he drains fear of its sway. Trade 3, a good neighborhood for a bad one. God chose to be in this place. Like he left heaven for here. And we're always looking for ways to get into the best neighborhood. We're always looking for the best schools. We're always looking for the closest parking spot that's nearest to Costco. I will spend hours looking at Airbnb to find out like what is cross-referencing it with Hotwire and everything to figure out like what's the choicest option for the least amount of money. We're always looking for the best for ourselves. But the reason that God left heaven was to make a beeline to the bottom. He made a beeline to the bottom. And it's not just Christmas that he does that. It's the whole way that he lived his life, and everything that Jesus does up until the cross, it follows that trajectory. He's making this descent into the bottom of human dysfunction. So when he hung out with lepers, he chose descent to where there was physical disease. When he chose to hang out with prostitutes, he chose descent to be with the morally reviled. When he chose tax collectors to eat with, he chose descent into the socially excluded. When he went to the hungry, when he chose the fishermen, he chose the academic rejects. When he came to the blind, he chose people who were deprived of their senses. And so all this stuff, they're not one-off moral lessons. They are a part of the big picture, a part of the whole reason that God came in the first place. They're integrally related to Christmas and to the trajectory that happened when God incarnated. They are God coming into the center of human dysfunction in order to bring the health that's in God. That's the whole story. That's what the gospel is. And the incarnation leads to the cross because the incarnation makes Jesus killable. It makes God flesh. And yeah, so Jesus traded it all in. He makes a beeline to the bottom. Why? To make the most important, the biggest trade that flipped everything, to trade places with us. His life for ours. To trade places with us. That's what happened on the cross. Our sin for his holiness, our death for his life. He was stripped naked so that we could be clothed. He lost his home so that we could find his home. He traded it all in. That's the name, Emmanuel, God with us. That's what Christmas is about. So we're gonna spend some time in reflection and silence. And sadly, I do not have a guitar here. I will by next week, but I couldn't get it while quarantining. So we get Paul Cardall, Christmas, O Come, Emmanuel, which was the least repulsive song that I could find in about 5 minutes before this. But it'll do for right now. And the reflection questions are on the website. We're gonna have some reflection time to just sit in the presence of God and ask those questions, and then we're gonna break into groups of about 4 to talk about it. But yeah, let's take a second to notice God here with us. God with us, Emmanuel. Yeah, wherever you're at, feel free to get into a comfortable position and yeah, breathe. Yeah, God, we thank you for becoming a human. Yeah, we thank you that you committed to say whatever you become, I'm going to come there with you, and you make that same commitment to each of us. And so whatever we've become, you're here with us. Yeah, you've chosen to be with us. You chose to pay whatever cost it takes to be with us, and we thank you, God. Thank you. God, your spirit lives in us. You are with us. God, help us to enter into the truth of Christmas this season. God, help us to be present with you. God, because you're in us, we will walk in your peace. We will walk in your humility. Yeah, God, we want to be incarnational like you are. We're going to be silent before God. Feel free to reflect or pray. God, thank you for being with us. Amen. So we are going to break into groups of 4